Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this snowy afternoon. My name is Stephen Dozier, and I'll be introducing our session today. On behalf of the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at VCU, we welcome you to the February presentation of the Wilder School Lunch and Learn series. Today, we have a very special presentation. Why corruption is the largest problem in the world and what can be done about it with Dr. Jay Albanese and Professor Maureen Maslow-Benway. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. Wilder School offers this unique opportunity each month, free virtual events for learning and growth. Each session features change agents, thought leaders, policymakers who provide insights on commentary of relevant topics of the day, none more relevant than today's topic. Again, my name is Stephen Dozier. I am the Wilder School Senior Director of Development. And before we get started, I have a few announcements to make. The Wilder School has released its latest January 2025 Commonwealth Poll results. This is a trusted source for Virginia's policymakers on key public issues. Next slide. Registration is open for the 18th Annual Higher Ground Leadership Conference. That's on February 28th, downtown Richmond Marriott, from 8 to 5. Please join the Grace E. Harris Leadership Institute for that amazing conference. The fall 2025 Wilder School graduation application deadline is April 1st. So please use the QR code that you see on the screen. Share this opportunity with someone you know who might be interested in attending our graduate program. I'm a proud student of the graduate program right now. I would encourage anybody to join and apply now. And without further ado, Dean of the Wilder School, Dr. Susan Gooden.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and welcome everyone to our February Lunch and Learn. I know this is going to be an exciting and very compelling topic. I want to welcome everyone, and I want to extend a special welcome to our international guests. I see the chat that we've got someone here from Nigeria, it's 6 p.m. there, and someone from Korea, it's 2 a.m. there. And Stephen said on a snowy afternoon, but I'm willing to bet that for our listener in Nigeria, it may not be a snowy evening for you. But we want to thank all of you for joining us, whether you're joining us near or far. We enjoy bringing these important lunch and learns around the world globally so that we can all learn about some of the pressing topics of the day. I do want to acknowledge that we had a great celebration last month. We celebrated Governor Wilder's 94th birthday, and what you see, the images in front of you, he was given a center aisle presentation from both the House and the Senate and the General Assembly a few weeks ago, and commemorating his service in the in the Virginia Senate General Assembly dating back to 1969. So we commend Governor Wilder and wish him again a wonderful, wonderful birthday. Also, for those of you who were more local, we had a legislative reception last week over at the Omni, and that was well attended. Nearly 300 individuals joined us. In addition to Governor Wilder, we also had Abigail Spanberger and Winsome Earl Sears. They were both there. So we said we are probably 99% confident that the future governor of Virginia may have been in the room with us last week. So we appreciate you joining us at that reception. And then finally, in a couple of months, you'll see before you, we have our Excellence in Virginia Government Awards. We're very proud of the work that government does on the federal, state, and national level. And we're proud at the Wilder School to recognize Virginians who have made exceptional contributions to our Commonwealth and to our citizens. So please mark your calendars. You have a QR code before you so that you can learn additional information. We look forward to celebrating everyone from our Lifetime Achievement Award winner to our unsung hero and everyone in between. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, who is Maureen Maslow Benway. She is Associate Professor and Chair of our Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness session program. And so thank you so much, Maureen, for moderating our session today. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Susan. Good afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you for joining us on this snowy Wednesday. It is an absolute privilege for me to introduce today's Lunch and Learn presenter, someone whose impact extends far beyond the walls of academia. Since I arrived at VCU over a dozen years ago, I have repeatedly heard about one of the Wilder School's most extraordinary professors, Dr. Jay Albanese. His reputation is not just one of academic excellence, but one of real-world influence. He is not content with simply studying problems. He dedicates his work to solving them. Dr. Albanese is a professor in the Criminal Justice Program at the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University. He is an internationally renowned expert on organized crime, corruption, ethics, and transnational crime. His career has been marked by both scholarly achievement and public service. Dr. Albanese has served as the chief of the International Center of the National Institute of Justice. He's advised the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and he's led conversations on ethics and justice at the highest levels. Beyond his impressive credentials, a Ph.D. from Rutgers University, his many books and journal articles, and his leadership of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences, Dr. Albanese is also a dedicated educator. His passion for teaching and mentorship has earned him numerous honors, including the Distinguished Teaching Award from VCU and the Commonwealth of Virginia's highest faculty recognition, the Outstanding Faculty Award. However, what truly sets Dr. Albanese apart is his ability to connect research to reality, ensuring that his work leads to meaningful change. This afternoon, we are fortunate to hear from someone whose insights and expertise are shaping the future of justice and ethics. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Jay Albanese. Jay?
Thank you very much, Maureen. I appreciate that very generous introduction. Yeah, what I would like to do today, because we're very interested in hearing from folks viewing in, I will do a short presentation, maybe 15 minutes or so, and that will be followed by a Q&A, because I think this is arguably the most important topic of all. So let's get to it. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. So my argument here is, corruption is the largest problem in the world. Let me do another click here. I'm sorry. Do this one. Nope. All right. Okay, we're back. I'm sorry. We had a little glitch there. Here we go. I'm going to share the screen. Okay, 1, 2, 3. This should work better. Okay. Okay. So first thing, the most important time, everyone listening and viewing today, you know, we're really all have a very limited time on this planet, so we should be doing something important, right? That's what gives your life meaning. And people have thought about this for many, many years. As Einstein says, you know, we're here to do good. It's responsibility of every human being to aspire to do something worthwhile to make the world better than what we originally found. All right. And one of my favorite quotes: "The bad news is that time flies. The good news is, you know, you're the pilot." So my point here in starting time is short. Problems that are unaddressed always get worse over time. So therefore, it's important that we focus on, the most serious problems facing humankind. So how do we even go about doing that? Well, what are, the worst problems in the world? Well, fortunately, people have given this, quite a bit of thought. If our time is important, we should focus on the most important problems. Well, let's find them. Well, the best known list is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The United Nations does this. And keep in mind, all the United Nations is a group of the vast majority of countries of the world, 193 countries, invented after World War II so that we could, in fact, discuss, identify, and solve problems which were increasingly international in nature. So by consensus of all the countries in the world, 197 member states of the UN, they came to a consensus in 2015 of the most important problems that they're focusing on over the next 15 years between 2016 and 2030. Now, keep in mind, these are not aspirational goals. These are, in fact, I won't get into the details, but there's 169 indicators broken down for each one. There are targets. There is a UN group that follows progress being made in each one of these areas. So it isn't just a pie in the sky list. It's an empirical list that is designed to be measured empirically. All right. And you say, well, okay, you want to do something important. Well, the nations of the world has said these are the most important problems facing the world at the current moment. And you say, well, boy, this is great, but I don't, in fact, know anything about climate action or life below water or clean water and sanitation. And sure, there are specialists in every single one of these areas. So my question is, well, what do they all have in common? And the one thing they all have in common is that every single one of these 17 problems were either created by human beings or made worse by the decisions of human beings, every single one without actions. And the bad or absent decisions were often the result of poor decisions, bad decisions, self-serving decisions, or non-decisions made by human beings. So my argument here is when you look at the largest problems in the world listed there on the left, the one thing they all have in problem is, in fact, corruption. So let's take a look. Okay, well, if corruption caused all these problems or made them all worse, how do we make an impact? Well, let's take a quick look here. How about a nice little picture? First, you say, well, okay, maybe we could reduce corruption through education. Well, there's been a lot of attention to that over the years, and here it is on one slide. These are a bunch of countries in the world and on different continents, and looking at years of schooling and how they rank on the Corruption Perceptions Index. And sure enough, education does in fact make a difference. Higher levels of education are correlated with lower levels of corruption on a broad general scale. The slope of this line isn't as steep as we'd like to see it. And the reason for that, of course, is, and there's lots of studies about this, is higher education is correlated with people who are more committed to civil liberties, more aware of international standards, that you're not stuck with the local conditions you face today. And education is correlated with people who are less tolerant of government repression. So I've given you some bad news. first some good news here. The content, education is important. The good news here, here's a chart covering 200 years. When you look at this little mountain there in red, that is global literacy. Global literacy has never been higher on the planet. You go back 200 years, it was below 20%. Now it is over 80% of the world can read or write. The slope increased dramatically. I have the yellow line there in the middle. Starting after World War II, that's when the UN was founded, and one of the early objectives of the UN was to increase the ability of people on the planet to read and write so they could participate in their own governments. So that became a very important thing. So that's good news. The good news is global literacy is great. Just dramatic improvements over the years. All right, and you say, okay, how about more good news? The percentage of the population on the planet, and here's 12 countries to illustrate this. This is, of course, is all measured very closely. The percentage of the population on planet Earth with no formal education has been dropping. That is, more people are having primary and secondary school education than, in fact, ever before. So literacy has gotten better, and the percentage of people who are going to school is going better. These are all good things. The bad news is, despite better literacy, more people going to school, corruption has gotten worse, and this is the problem. And when you look at, there's a couple indexes, the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index is the leading indicator around the world, and there are others, but they correlate very highly. But if you look at the left slide here, this is 2010. You see the number of high bribery countries reporting. Then you look here for in 2020, the number of, and these are, of course, surveys of citizens that did they have to pay a bribe to get certain services. And the number has, in fact, increased pretty dramatically. So literacy is getting better. Schooling is getting better. Corruption is getting worse. How can that, how can that be happening? Well, one quick side note, when we use the word corruption, sometimes we think of it's a vague notion. It's not a vague notion. It's a very specific thing. We did a big study at VCU a few years ago, looking at hundreds of corruption cases over a period of years, and said, when you look at corruption globally, these 8 categories really represent the overwhelming majority of corruption. So when we're talking about corruption, we're talking about bribery, offering, soliciting, receiving, extortion, demanding or threats for official action, contracting and procurement fraud, embezzlement, nepotism, official misconduct, obstruction of justice, and violation of regulatory laws. So when I say corruption is really one word to say all of these things. And of course, the reason why it's so important is that, they undermine the legitimate processes of government and business, and they work against the interests of civil society, people like you and I. So the question is, why are we not making better progress against unethical conduct and corruption in general? Well, the issue becomes, well, if education does make a difference, as we saw in that very, very first graph, well, then what should be taught? Maybe that's the issue. And when you look at the content of most education planet-wide, it focuses on substantive knowledge, history, math, science, language, and so on. Taught much less often is how to evaluate facts and how to make decisions, looking forward. So education has become overwhelmingly designed to impart factual knowledge. And the argument I'm making here is that we need to do better than that. More than facts are needed because we're asking people to make decisions in the current and future environment. So how do we get them to make better decisions? Going back to our original 17 largest problems in the world. So we don't make existing conditions worse. Aristotle's great quote, by doing just acts that the just person is produced. And of course, there's hundreds of surveys that I won't bother you with of this is a survey, a Gallup poll in America. Americans believe that people are making worse decisions. Morality is declining, and that they measure this each year to assess trends. So how do we change all this? Well, here's what I'm suggesting. What is important is that here on the left, how do you create an ethical decision so people make better decisions? Because what we have oftentimes are well-educated people in charge of business and government, but they're making terrible decisions, or they're not making important decisions due to self-interest rather than public interest. So how do we create an ethical disposition, an ethical principled outlook? And then at the same time, you need people who are more selfless and less selfish, all right? And they're more intolerant of the corruption on the part of others, all right? Developing the courage to act and be resistant to influences toward selfish conduct. And then last, of course, the rule of law. We need a higher level. And when corruption is reduced, indicators of rule of law, measures of justice, accountability, can in fact be measured. And the UN and many other bodies do the exact same thing. So we want less self-seeking behavior. My point is, we're not stuck with the ethical conduct of today, all right? We're not stuck with it. We can change it. We're just not focused on it, is what I'm arguing. So for example here, there's been a lot of attention starting in the 1990s. The World Bank for the first time talked about the cancer of corruption, giving low interest loans around the world. Too much of it was being misspent. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development had the Anti-Bribery Convention in 1999, and the UN Convention on Corruption, which is now ratified by over 95% of the countries of the world, are encouraging countries through an implementation mechanism to pass laws and have prosecutions to be less tolerant of corrupt conduct. So these are all, most of these things I mentioned they want structural reforms to reduce the opportunities for corruption. These are, in fact, important things. Now, on the middle here, structural reforms are good. They're important, but they're not enough. They reduce opportunities. What happens is there's lots of people who will exploit opportunities that remain. How do you reduce the number of people looking to exploit opportunities for selfish, unethical, corrupt conduct? And the only way you do that is through education and training. People are not born ethical. Those of you who are parents know you have to teach kids from a young age how to stand on line, how to wait your turn, why not to push ahead, right? So from very small things to larger things in terms of how do you assess your own interest versus the interest of others. All right. These are the principles for individual accountability, creating an ethical disposition. And of course, so if you have structural reforms, which the world there's a lot of them now. And to me, those are important. Secondly, ethics is really important to reduce the pool of people who are disposed to exploiting any remaining opportunities. All right. And then you get, the ethics of decisions. You get more just acts. And so where does this come from, this ethics in education? Well, most of it comes from civil society, right? There's government, there's business, and there's civil society, which is most of us. All right. That's academia, the public and private sectors, non-governmental organizations, faith-based organizations that promote non-selfish views toward your own profit, interest, or position in society. That's ethical. When I say ethics, I'm meaning what is your obligation to other people you don't know, people you haven't met, anybody. And because when you see corrupt behavior, it's impossible to engage in a corrupt act without also engaging in an unethical act. All right. The two concepts are very closely connected. So what I'm arguing here is how do we address the world's largest problems, right? And I gave you the Sustainable Development Goals. Ethics lies at the core of all corrupt conduct, right? Education, training, accountability can reduce the pool of people who seek unethical advantage when the opportunity arises. All right. And when you look at corruption, well, corruption is self-seeking conduct, putting yourself above, more important, minimizing harms to others, making worse every one of the world's largest social problems. So if you want to make a difference in the world, you have to address the largest problems. I'm arguing that corruption is the one thing that the world's largest problems have in common. My last slide. This summarizes everything that I just said in one picture. Here's the world's largest problems as identified by the nations of the world. We have a lot of structural changes, good progress between the 1990s till now. More laws, more enforcement, more anti-corruption efforts of many kinds. But we need more than that because corrupt people will exploit both corrupt and non-corrupt environments. This pool has to be reduced. The way to shrink this pool of corrupt people is through ethics, education, training, and of course, reinforcement to push more selfless behavior and less selfish behavior. And of course, civil society is the place where most of this is taking place. Academia, NGOs, faith-based private sector, and so on. They can be the sources for real change. Anyway, let me leave it there, and let's go to some questions and answers that anybody might have. Thank you all for listening.
Hi, I'm back, and I'd like to get started with some questions, but just a reminder, if you have any, please put them in the chat or the Q&A section, and we will get to them as the conversation proceeds. So to start off, Jay, how about this question? Is there any evidence that if people learn about ethical principles, they actually will be ethical?
Yeah, there is actually, and you see it in workplaces now. There's a number of studies in criminology, the psychological literature, the organizational behavior literature, public administration, showing, for example, those of you who work for a large organization, a university, many businesses, government, you have to take annual ethics training. And what are these things? They are reminders, nudges of things that you can do, you can't do. In many workplaces, you cannot accept gifts. You cannot do things like that. And there's been some great experimental studies of you see at the top of some exams, it says, please know when you're taking this exam, you are bound by the honor code of this institution, of this university, or whatever. And you have to, all of those things are small things, but they push you back on the path. And it shows of the controlled studies, they actually make a difference in people's behavior. The bigger picture, of course, is teaching people, one, to recognize an ethical dilemma when it occurs, two, knowing what ethical principles are, and then three, developing the courage to act on those principles. And usually that's all scenario-based learning beyond learning the ethical principles themselves.
Okay, thank you. Bringing it to the United States. The United States faces our own significant challenges with political corruption, particularly following the 2010 Citizens United decision, which increased the influence of money in politics. Lobbying and campaign finance practices have further contributed to this issue. How can we effectively educate American citizens on ethics and the impact of corruption? And do you believe such efforts would be successful, given the current political and cultural landscape?
Yeah. Yeah, my view is we are never stuck with the world that presents itself to us today. We are all of us in a position to make change. And yeah, I think the issue is, this is why, civics education is extremely important part of education. When we talk to people around the world and say, yeah, in America, when you're running for Congress or president, you have to run for 2 years. You have to raise millions of dollars. And that is an unheard of model around the world. In many countries around the world, the whole campaign season is either 3 to 6 months in most places on the planet. The fact that you have to raise, many millions of dollars to run for office, you tend to get untoward outcomes, right? Because ideally, in a democracy, you want the majority of people representing you to look like you, all right, to have, your kind of background. And the problem is now with, in America, you have to have access to large amounts of wealth to get elected. And and then you look at the people you elect, they look less and less like the majority of citizens in a democracy. So those are all structural problems that can be resolved. They're hard to resolve because they would require changes in law, the people who were elected. And of course, the people who were elected were successful by raising all that money and campaigning for, a year or two or whatever. This is why there is, resistance to doing that. But, we're certainly not stuck with the system of, big money politics that we currently have. And Supreme Courts have to change their mind in the past, as well as have Congresses, have state legislatures.
Okay, thank you. Are there any successful models of ethics education in other countries that the U.S. could adopt to reduce public corruption? Best practices abroad, maybe?
Yeah, there's a lot. After the last crime Congress in 2015 in Doha, they funded and the UN has a thing called the Education for Justice Initiative. And the thought was, when you look at the international problems that the UN is focused on, a lot of the world is unaware of them. And this is everything from, the causes, outcomes, responses to human trafficking, to all of the big things that the UN focuses on. And they started developing open access modules, separate, basically courses, PowerPoints, examples, cases, all kinds of things, a set for primary school, a set for secondary school, and a set for university education. I was involved with the modules for university education, and they now, one of the modules, and these are basically courses, online courses, there's one on anti-corruption, there's one on ethics and integrity, and there's one on organized crime and human trafficking and and other things. But they are all free online, and there's been trainings all over the world focusing on the developed world uh, to say these are open access materials free to anybody on planet Earth to try to raise awareness. So they're trying to aim directly there at the education component. That is, if younger people are made aware that the situation that they're living in, wherever they are on the planet, uh, they're not stuck with. They can create a better environment to do business, to get educated, to go to the doctor, and so on.
Thank you, Jay. It's common that well-educated and ethical decision makers struggle to maintain their integrity within a corrupt environment. They frequently find themselves either forced out or becoming corrupted themselves. What measures can be taken to combat this?
Yeah, this is a big problem. There's nothing worse than working in a corrupt environment. The probably the biggest breakthrough in recent times has been the spread of whistleblower laws around the world. Because when you look at the big cases around the world, anti-corruption cases, everything from big corporate corruption cases to governmental corruption cases, the most of them began with information from insiders, because the insiders saw what was going on and they said, this is wrong. This is corrupt. This is unethical. This is illegal. And whistleblower laws protect the person coming forward, because normally you require that inside information to begin many of these cases. And so that is important, although whistleblowing activity requires bravery. People criticize you because you're going against whatever the inertia is that happens to be in the wrong direction. But whistleblower laws has been very successful in many places in changing a corrupt environment.
Well, speaking of bravery, one of the questions the audience proposed was someone strongly believes in the courage to act. He purports that it is not only about people being selfish. People I thought were selfish are acting out of fear. They want to protect themselves and protect their families. What are your thoughts on how fear disrupts the effort to fight corruption?
Well, it depends on what you're afraid of, but absolutely. I mean, fear skews everything. Skews your perception of what's going on. Um, but but with regard to acting or not acting, if you're walking down the street and some stranger up the block starts screaming, "Help! Help! Help!" Uh, in America, you have no legal obligation to intervene in any way. Um, but you do have a strong moral obligation to intervene, to call the police, to do something. And that is increasingly lost on a society that looks at the world in a very selfish way, that it's about me, that's their problem, let them worry about it. So it's easy to compartmentalize people as the other. The whole purpose of ethics and anti-corruption to say, hey, we have a responsibility for each other. All right. So whether we know each other, whether you're on the other side of the planet, whether you're on the other side of town, all right, we are all equal in our humanity. And we are all deserving of our respect as human beings. So therefore, we have to start acting as if we really mean that. And increasingly, we see this turn in society in general, is documented by many different studies and surveys, that people look for their own welfare to the exclusion of others, minimizing any harm they might have, minimizing any impact it might have on the victim. So in ethics, it's really encouraging moral accountability for your action or inaction.
Police are frequently the arm of the government. Are corrupt police always indicative of a corrupt government? Can ethical police and corrupt government coexist?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, police agencies work for the government. They and for many people, police represent the government in their community because that's the government official that they see all the time. And there have been a number of instances of police corruption. But then the question is, the investigation has to determine, well, is this a bad police officer or is there a corrupt environment? All right. And corrupt environments are much more difficult because that means there are people actually protecting it or facilitating it along the way. But this is true everywhere. We've had some major prosecutions of pharmaceutical companies the same way in price fixing cases, fraud against consumers, things like that, where there were a corrupt environment. And what you have to do to go after the corrupt environment, you have to hold individuals accountable for their conduct, right? That's always the way. You have to hold people accountable for their conduct. But at the same time, what are you doing to make the organization better? Uh, the I guess I'll leave that there for now. Thank you.
In your opinion, what happens as fascism and authoritative regimes rise around the world with unchecked corruption? What's your take on the long-term prognosis of corruption?
Well, this is why you'll see the global trend over the last, well, let's keep it in current events. You see, since World War II, right? World War I and World War II, within 25 years, we had two world wars, killed 75 million people, military, civilians, and that's what provoked right after World War II to form the UN, saying that's unsustainable as a human race. I mean, we can't be killing 75 million people and resolving our problems by through wars. So the whole idea of the UN was saying, okay, we have to get regular meetings and discussions among countries so we don't resolve our conflicts through violence. We do it through diplomacy. And then you get people at a table, and I guarantee you keep people long enough, you would think, for example, well, there are some things people just won't agree on, but it is surprising. Quick example, 20 years ago, maybe 23 years ago, I'm at a UN meeting, and the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime was just on the verge of being passed, and there were several people from the different member states around the world said, this whole stuff about organ trafficking is a myth, where people harvest kidneys and sell them to rich people and all that. It's a myth. It doesn't exist. And of course, no one says that anymore. Why? Because NGOs, researchers, academics, some governments went out and you do the research. Well, what is going on the ground? All right. You do interviews, you take photographs, you interview people, and all of a sudden, oh my God, this is happening around the world, and that's how you identify a problem. A little bit longer than that, human trafficking was the same way. Human trafficking was seen as a morally neutral thing that as well, if people go to some other country and they make their way, well, they're sending their money back home anyway. So it's not really a big issue, right? Well, you need some people on the ground to start gathering facts. Well, what really is happening on the ground? All right. And that basically it is, a research effort, and NGOs, academics, governments, a lot of people get them. And now we have a much better understanding of what the flows are. Why do we have such a large pool of people at risk of being trafficked? How can we reduce the size of that pool? How do we, and all of that. So my point is to all that is that things that we see as problems today, we didn't always see as problems. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came into existence at the end of World War II, there's only about 30 human rights at the time, but what we do know now is that, well, as society progresses through democratization, people get more educated, the more aware, they have more control over who's in charge. That makes all the difference. Authoritarian governments are always doomed to fail because they don't represent the will of the people, right? They represent the will of the leaders, uh, and uh, and sometimes they fall under their own weight, their own corrupt weight. Sometimes there's violence, revolutions, civil wars. Sometimes courts step in and to take control. In a number of countries, sometimes the military says this is crazy. But anytime you see those things, it's because leadership is not representing the true desires of civil society.
Jay, I'd like to kind of shift it back to education.
Sure.
Do you think that ethics training should be mandatory in high school? We have mandatory courses in STEM and other subjects like that. Should there be a mandatory ethics course for all American high schoolers?
Well, I mean, to me, yeah, I don't know. I certainly want input into what that course was. Simply because, you can take a mandatory math course and then I give you a test a year or two later and you've learned nothing. In other words, you forget whatever you might have learned in that course. Ethics requires reinforcement. So it's much more of a lifelong thing. I do think, just like we teach people the principles of language and math and science and history, all those things are important, very important to understand history because, many ways we're reliving things that we've lived through before. So that's very important. But with ethics, you're teaching people how to make decisions in unclear, murky, or threatening environments. And how do you know? In my ethics class, for example, it's just filled with scenarios taken from real life, and you get people to think about it. So, for example, when I went to the pharmacy a couple of years ago, the pharmacy intern had a tag on her shirt saying, intern. She was having trouble with the high-tech cash register. Anyway, I gave her a $20 bill for a $10 copay, expecting $10 and change. Anyway, she struggles with the cash register and then hands me back $40 and change. And then I realized, oh my God, she must have thought I gave her a $50 bill. I gave her a $20 bill. And so I asked my class, what do I do? And you'd be surprised what people will say. Some people will say, it's her fault. Keep the money. The drugstore charges too much on everything. The heck with that. And all those are after the fact rationalizations that, of course, minimize any harm you might cause. This poor intern might lose her job, and I realized, okay, this is an ethical decision. So anytime it's an ethical, most people don't even realize that's an ethical decision you're being asked to make. All right. And then the question is, well, what are the principles? Well, there's, a group of ethical principles that have lasted the test of time. So you teach people how to do this. In the infamous, George Floyd case, for example, right? The police officer kneeled on the neck of Floyd, who was handcuffed and face down, saying he couldn't breathe. All right. That's an easy ethical case. But the hard one, though, is, and the one I use when I teach it is, what about the officers who were standing there who did nothing? That's the ethical thing. Why did they fail to act when they could have acted and prevented a death, prevented a homicide? And I said, why do you think they got? And you have people say, and you see now, you can see why all those rationalizations you could have been given are very hollow. They're very self-serving. They're really about you. I don't want to contradict a superior officer. I don't blah, 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 all those kinds of things. So now this is an ethical decision, and then how do you reason your way through it? And these are the kinds of things that help breed ethical character. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, right, as I said at the beginning, we're all on this planet for a limited period of time. And as I emphasize to my students, and is that ultimately when the day comes, people aren't going to be talking about, well, the day you die. Oh, he was a great vice president. This is a wonderful super. They're going to talk about what kind of character did you have? How did you treat other people? Uh, what was your outlook on, your actions toward others? How did you treat strangers? That's character. That's all ethics. And we tend to evaluate people like that. Matter of fact, the people we respect the most in the history of humankind are high character people. I mean, look at Nelson Mandela and Mother Teresa. There's a whole list of these people. Uh, they're all quite different. Well, why do we like? Because of the way they treated others, how they exercised their moral obligations to fellow human beings. So that's to me why ethics should be at really the center of everything. Show people that they're faced with ethical decisions, small and large, but every day. And you know, we need people to respond better to them when they come up.
Thanks. Those are some great points you raised. I'd like to shift it back to the US. There's a number of questions on corruption in the United States.
Sure.
How much of a problem is corruption in the US, apart from political campaign funding? And how would we reliably measure it?
Sure. It is hard to measure. Yeah, I mean, it depends because the global standard is doing surveys of citizens who've been asked to pay bribes and things like that. That often doesn't get at institutional corruption, where you have corrupt agencies. In a research project we did at VCU a few years ago, we interviewed a whole bunch of former FBI agents and federal prosecutors who had worked corruption cases. So we went through and dug out all these cases and want to talk about how they made these cases, what was the thinking, all that kind of thing. And there's a lot of corruption going on. Some was corruption in local governments, in procurement. Some of it was nepotism, appointing your unqualified nephew as being the head of something, all these kinds of things, to actual just stealing money, taking public tax money and just, giving it to yourself or your friends. So there is a lot of it going on. I mean, more than you would think for a country like this, but you need to have enforcement. And I see it argued both in this country and at the UN. Without an active enforcement, there's no accountability. You never know what crimes you prevent by being present. A quick example. We talked to a former mayor, I won't say the state, a mayor who was shaken down some years ago, and there was a proposal by a developer to build a high rise in his town that would overlook a city and so on. And what he did, and he was against it. He was a lifelong resident of the town, said no, it would destroy the character of our city. And so some guy made an appointment with him from one of the developers, and he had never met the guy. Comes to his place, and he gave him a drink and blah blah. Anyway, the guy leaned over the table to grab one of the snacks on the table, and so this guy was carrying a gun. And I said, "Okay." And I said, "So you had to make a decision right there." He said. I said, his decision was to be angry. He was so angry. He said, this guy's going to try to shake me down. So he ended the meeting, didn't do anything of that night. But then I said, okay. And at that point, you did call the U.S. Attorney's Office. I said, why did you call the U.S. Attorney's Office? Why didn't you call the local police, the state police, the local DA, somebody? Why the U.S. Attorney? He says, because I had read in the paper that they were making corruption cases. And they said, so I knew if I come in there with a corruption complaint, they're more likely to take me seriously. So it's just the presence that people are taking corruption seriously. Anyway, just to end that story, later we tracked down that former U.S. attorney who had since retired. Great guy. And I said, now, when he came in to give you that complaint that he was being shaken down, did you believe him? He said, absolutely not. They made him, he said, I've never had a politician said he's being shaken down. So anyway, they made him wear a wire and made a very substantial corruption case. But the point is, the fact that agencies were making cases increases the public's confidence that we are addressing the corruption problem in some way. If you're not making corruption cases at all, well, that doesn't mean that there's no corruption. It means you're just not taking it seriously. So it's very important to be doing that.
Well, that's a great segue to the next question we have. Dr. Albanese, with President Trump executive order halting the prosecution of corruption and bribery cases on U.S. citizens in an effort he claims will boost American business competitive, how do you see this decision affecting the rule of law domestically and America's standing as a global leader in anti-corruption efforts?
Very good question. He's talking about there's an act the U.S. passed in 1977, a long time ago, called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which essentially makes it illegal for companies to bribe foreign officials to sell stuff. That came out in the 70s after Lockheed, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, all big plane manufacturers were found to be bribing foreign officials to sell civilian aircraft. Now, civilian aircraft are very expensive. At that time, they were costing like $40 or $50 million each. And an order from an airline might be for 10 planes. These are big money deals. So that's what resulted in the act. And people at the time said, oh, this is going to put the U.S. at a competitive disadvantage because, the French make airplanes, et cetera. That never came to be. And since that time, we have the OECD anti-bribery convention that's in Europe. And I believe there's 46 countries that now are bound by that treaty. And that has almost the exact same provisions as the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So to me, you never want to encourage corrupt conduct. And if I tell you we're not going to be enforcing the law that prohibits corrupt conduct, are you not then encouraging the corrupt conduct? That's the question.
Well, we're almost out of time. I have one more question for you. And that is, at the end of the day, why do you think we're not making better progress against unethical conduct and corruption in general?
Yeah, it's because we're not taking it seriously. We're taking personal knowledge, personal gain, personal advantage to the extreme. And the point is, any advantage I get, I somehow deserve. That kind of view of the world. That's not the world you want to live in. You want to live in a world where people, in fact, feel an obligation to others. Because there's one way we're all equal in the US and across the planet, we're all equal in our humanity. We're all equal as human beings. We all have the same right to freedom, to find our way, to make a living. And for those who would, in fact, exploit their advantage over anyone at any time are engaging in unethical conduct. And if you're engaging in unethical conduct, you're almost always also engaging in corrupt conduct. And, that's why it's the largest problem in the world.
Thank you, Dr. Albanese.
Thank you, Maureen. I appreciate it.
Jay, what a way to wrap it up. I thought that was a great point to be made, and I hope our audience will take that in more as they leave this session. I want to thank Professor Maureen Maslow Benway and Jay Albanese, Dr. Jay Albanese, for this presentation today. Thank you to our Dean, Dean Gooden, as well as our communications team, who's working really hard in the background to make these lunch and learn sessions a possibility. Last but not least, we will have Mayor Danny Avula join us on March 19th as our speaker for our March presentation of the Lunch and Learn to share his vision for Richmond, which was originally scheduled in January 15th, but was postponed due to the city's water crisis. So please join us next month on March 19th for your lunch hour to hear from Mayor Danny Avula. And thank you all for joining us, even as far as the continent of Africa, which is amazing. Thank you for joining us. And I hope everyone here has a great rest of their day.
Thank you.